In the cold confines of their shelter, Jack reveals the truth behind his driven nature, while Emma begins to see beyond his carefully constructed facade. Dim the lights and cozy up, my dears, because things are about to get deep. And I mean deep. Chapter 6. The Weight of Stillness. The generator's steady hum had become a constant backdrop to Emma and Jack's confinement. Hours had passed since their argument, the tension between them palpable in the chilly air of the maintenance building. Emma sat huddled in a corner, absently flipping through an old maintenance manual she'd found, while Jack paced restlessly, checking his phone every few minutes despite the lack of signal. Emma watched him from the corner of her eye, her earlier anger fading into a mix of curiosity and lingering frustration. There was something almost manic about his movements, a nervous energy she hadn't noticed before. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, Emma spoke up.
You know, wearing a trench in the concrete floor isn't going to make the storm pass any faster.
Jack stopped abruptly, running a hand through his already disheveled hair.
Sorry,
He muttered.
I hate feeling trapped like this, helpless.
There was something in his tone that gave Emma pause. It wasn't the annoyance of a workaholic missing a meeting, but something deeper, more vulnerable.
Want to talk about it?
She found herself asking, surprising even herself with the offer. Jack hesitated, then sank down to the floor near her, though still maintaining a careful distance. He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the cold concrete.
Did you ever wonder why a tech guy like me is so into fitness?
He finally asked, his voice soft. Emma shook her head, realizing she'd never really thought about it. Jack took a deep breath.
I was an athlete before I was a tech entrepreneur, Olympic-level swimmer. Had my eyes set on gold.
Wow.
Emma said, genuinely impressed.
What happened?
Car crash.
Jack said, his voice tight.
Senior year of high school. A drunk driver hit us head on. I was in the passenger seat.
Emma felt her heart clench.
Jack, I'm so sorry. I had no idea.
He gave her a sad smile.
It's okay. I survived, obviously, but it was bad. They had to put me in a medically induced coma for weeks to let the brain swelling go down.
Jack's eyes took on a faraway look, as if he was seeing something beyond the dingy walls of the maintenance building.
The thing is, I was conscious for a lot of it. Trapped in my own body, unable to move, to speak, to do anything. Do you have any idea what that's like? To be utterly helpless day after day with nothing but your own thoughts?
Emma shook her head, unable to imagine such an experience.
It changes you.
Jack continued.
When I finally woke up, really woke up, I swore I'd never feel that helpless again. I threw myself into physical therapy, pushed myself harder than the doctors thought possible, and when it became clear that my swimming career was over, I channeled all that drive into tech.
As Jack spoke, Emma felt her perception of him shifting. The tech bro facade was crumbling, revealing a man driven not by greed or ambition, but by a deep-seated need to be in control, to make a difference.
That's why this app is so important to me.
Jack said, his voice growing passionate.
It's about giving people tools, giving them agency over their health. It's about making sure no one ever has to feel as helpless as I did in that hospital bed.
Emma found herself moving closer, drawn by the intensity in his words.
That's really incredible, Jack. I had you all wrong.
Jack shrugged, looking almost embarrassed.
I know I can come on strong sometimes with the jokes and the bravado. It's easier than letting people see, well, this.
He gestured vaguely to himself.
I think this is pretty great.
Emma said softly, surprising herself with her honesty. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them seemed charged with possibility. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they both looked away, not quite ready to confront the growing attraction between them.
So,
Jack said, clearing his throat.
What about you? What drives Dr. Emma Rossi?
Emma hesitated, her instinct to deflect warring with a newfound desire to open up. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. If Jack could be vulnerable, maybe she could too.
I was 12 when my parents split up.
She began, her voice soft but steady.
It wasn't a surprise. They'd been fighting for years, but that didn't make it any easier.
Emma's eyes took on a faraway look, seeing not the dingy maintenance room, but the memories of her past.
I remember the day Dad left. He packed his bags while Mom was at work. I sat on the stairs, watching him go back and forth from their bedroom to his car. He barely looked at me, like he was afraid to see my face. When he finally finished, he just stood there in the hallway for a moment. Then he said, "Be good for your mother, Emma," and walked out the door.
She swallowed hard, surprised by how raw the memory still felt.
After that, it was like I didn't have a home anymore. I spent weekdays with Mom, weekends with Dad, but neither place felt right. At Mom's, everything reminded me of Dad. The empty chair at the dinner table, the garage where his car used to be. And at Dad's new apartment, well, it was like staying at a hotel. Sterile, impersonal.
Jack listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. Emma found strength in his steady gaze and continued.
The worst part was feeling like I had to be two different people. With Mom, I had to be the responsible one, helping with chores, never causing trouble. She was working longer hours to make ends meet, and I didn't want to add to her stress. But with Dad, I had to be the fun, carefree kid he remembered. He'd plan these elaborate outings, trying to cram a week's worth of parenting into 2 days. It was exhausting, constantly switching between these roles.
Emma's fingers absently traced patterns on the cold concrete floor.
I started throwing myself into my studies. School became my refuge. There, I didn't have to be anyone's daughter. I could just be Emma, the student. In books and science, everything made sense. There were rules, formulas, clear cause and effect. Not like the messy, unpredictable world of emotions and relationships.
She let out a small, self-deprecating laugh.
I guess that's why I was drawn to medicine. In the hospital, everything has a purpose. Every action is about solving a problem, healing someone. It's clean, it's logical. No room for the kind of emotional chaos I grew up with.
Emma finally looked up, meeting Jack's eyes.
I know it probably sounds ridiculous. Plenty of kids have it much worse. But it left its mark on me. I learned early on that people leave, that homes fall apart. So I built my own home, in a way, in my career, in my independence.
Her voice grew softer, tinged with a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show.
But sometimes I wonder what I've missed out on. All those walls I've built, all the connections I've avoided. They've kept me safe, but they've also kept me isolated.
She shook her head, as if trying to dispel the heavy emotions.
So yeah, that's why I come off as reserved, I guess. It's easier to keep people at arm's length than to risk letting them close enough to hurt you. But being here, talking to you like this, it makes me think maybe it's time to start taking down some of those walls.
Jack listened intently, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he reached out, hesitantly placing his hand over hers.
Thank you for sharing that with me, Emma. I know it couldn't have been easy.
The warmth of his hand on hers sent a flutter through Emma's stomach. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and felt something shift between them. The walls they'd both built up were starting to crumble, revealing the vulnerable, passionate people underneath. Just then, a loud clank from the generator startled them both. Jack jumped up, moving to check on the machine with a speed that spoke of his lingering discomfort with inaction.
Looks like it's running low on fuel,
he reported.
I should be able to refill it, but it might get a bit smoky in here for a minute. Want to help?
As they worked together to refuel the generator, their earlier teamwork resurfacing, Emma found herself seeing Jack in a new light. He wasn't just the cocky tech entrepreneur she'd initially pegged him as. He was complex, driven by a genuine desire to never feel powerless again, to use his skills to empower others. And as Jack flashed her a grin over the top of the generator, his face smudged with grease, but his eyes bright with shared accomplishment, Emma realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this holiday getaway than she'd bargained for. The maintenance building was still cold. The storm still raged outside, but somehow, the space between them had grown warmer, filled with a tentative understanding and the possibility of something more.